In the vast emptiness of the Arizona desert, where the scorching sun burns away all secrets and the night brings cold that cuts to the bone, a lonely cowboy named Jack Morrison was about to discover that humanity is not alone in the universe. What began as an ordinary ride across the dunes on a sweltering August afternoon would transform into an encounter that defies all logic and reason. When Jack stumbled upon a dying creature half buried in the sand, a being with scaled skin that shimmered like emeralds and eyes that held the wisdom of ancient civilizations, he made a choice that would forever alter his destiny. He chose compassion over fear. He chose to save a life, even when that life belonged to something utterly alien. But acts of kindness ripple across dimensions, and by the time dawn painted the horizon with gold and crimson, Jack would find his humble ranch surrounded by silent guardians from the stars, watching, waiting, protecting. This is the story of one man's mercy and the cosmic debt that followed. Jack Morrison had always been a man of few words and even fewer complications. At 43 years old, he'd spent the better part of 2 decades working his small cattle ranch on the outskirts of Sentinel, Arizona, a town so small it barely warranted a dot on most maps. His life followed a predictable rhythm. Wake before dawn, tend to the cattle, repair whatever the desert had broken overnight, and fall asleep under a blanket of stars so thick it seemed like you could reach up and grab a handful. He preferred it this way. After a messy divorce and a failed attempt at city life in Phoenix, the isolation suited him. Out here, the only drama came from coyotes testing the fence line or the occasional rattlesnake sunning itself on his porch steps. It was a Tuesday in mid-August where everything changed. The thermometer on his porch had read 108 degrees by noon, and Jack had decided to ride out to the northern section of his property to check on a water pump that had been giving him trouble. His horse, an aging quarter horse named Cisco, picked his way carefully across the desert terrain, weaving between saguaro cacti and mesquite bushes. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, a sea of tan and brown punctuated by the occasional splash of green where something stubborn enough had decided to grow. They were about 5 miles from the ranch house when Cisco suddenly stopped and refused to go forward. The horse's ears flattened against his head, and he began to sidestep nervously, snorting and tossing his head. Jack had ridden Cisco for nearly a decade and had never seen him act this way. He dismounted, holding the reins firmly as he tried to calm the animal. That's when he saw it, a strange pattern in the sand about 30 yards ahead, like something had crashed or been dragged across the ground. The track was wide, at least 6 feet across, and it carved a path from the east before ending abruptly in a small depression. Jack tied Cisco to a sturdy mesquite and approached on foot, his heart beginning to pound in a way that had nothing to do with the heat. As he got closer, he could see something partially buried in the sand at the end of the track. At first, he thought it might be a person, maybe someone who'd gotten lost and succumbed to the brutal desert conditions. But as he crouched down and began carefully brushing away the sand, his hands froze. The skin beneath his fingers wasn't human. It was covered in scales, each one about the size of a dime, and they shimmered with an iridescent quality that shifted between deep green and bronze in the harsh sunlight. The texture was smooth, almost like polished to stone, but with a flexibility that suggested living tissue. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he uncovered more of the creature. It was roughly humanoid in shape, 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, and a head, but that's where the similarities ended. The being was tall, perhaps 7 feet if it were standing, and its limbs were longer and more angular than any human's. Its hands had 4 fingers, each tipped with what looked like retractable claws currently sheathed beneath the scaled skin. But it was the face that truly marked this creature as alien. The head was more elongated than a human's, with a prominent ridge running from between the eyes back over the crown of the skull. The eyes themselves were closed, but they were large, taking up a significant portion of the face, with protective membranes visible beneath the scaled lids. There was no visible nose, just two small slits that contracted and expanded with shallow breaths. The mouth was wide and lipless, and when Jack carefully opened it to check for obstructions, he saw rows of sharp, translucent teeth. His mind raced through impossible explanations. A movie prop? Some kind of elaborate hoax? But the creature's chest was rising and falling with labored breaths, and when he placed his hand near those nostril slits, he could feel warm air pushing out. This thing, whatever it was alive and dying. The scales along its torso were damaged, some torn away entirely, revealing what looked like burns beneath. Dark fluid blood, Jack assumed, though it was more black than red seeped from several wounds. Every instinct screamed at him to get back on Cisco and ride away as fast as possible. To pretend he'd never seen this. To let the desert reclaim what had fallen from wherever this thing had come from. But Jack had never been good at walking away from suffering. It was why he'd nursed abandoned calves through the night, why he'd once spent 3 days tracking down a dog that had been dumped on the highway, why his ex-wife had once told him his problem was that he cared too much about things that couldn't care back. He looked back at Cisco, who was still agitated, pulling against the reins tied to the mesquite. Then he looked down at the dying creature in the sand. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, but it would still be hours before the temperature became bearable. If he left this being here, it would be dead by morning. Maybe that would be better. Maybe that would be safer. But Jack Morrison had never chosen safe over right, and he wasn't about to start now. The problem was logistics. The creature was massive and obviously heavy. There was no way he could lift it onto Cisco, even if the horse would tolerate having something so alien on its back. He needed help, but calling anyone meant questions he couldn't answer and involvement he didn't want. For a long moment, he stood there, the desert wind picking up as it always did in the late afternoon, carrying with it the scent of creosote and hot sand. Then he remembered the old travois he de-built last year when he had to drag some fallen fence posts back to the ranch. It was crude but effective, and he'd left it in a storage shed about a mile south. He could ride back, get the travois, and use Cisco to drag the creature back to the ranch. It would take time, and it would be full dark before they made it home, but it was the only option he could see. Jack made his decision. He took off his shirt and soaked it with water from his canteen, then carefully laid it over the creature's damaged torso to provide some protection from the sun. He whispered, feeling foolish as he did so, "I'm coming back. Just hold on." Then he untied Cisco, mounted up, and rode south as fast as the old horse could safely manage in the heat. It took Jack nearly 3 hours to retrieve the travois, return to the site, and carefully load the unconscious alien onto the makeshift stretcher. The creature was indeed heavy, easily 300 pounds, and moving it without causing further injury required patience he didn't know he possessed. By the time he had it secured with rope and began the slow journey back to the ranch, the sun was a crimson disk balanced on the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if he hadn't been terrified. With every step Cisco took, Jack's mind spun with questions. What was this creature? Where had it come from? The burns and injuries suggested some kind of crash, but he'd heard no explosion, seen no smoke or fire. The desert was vast, but not so vast that a spacecraft crash would go completely unnoticed. Unless it had happened at night, or unless whatever brought this being to Earth was using technology beyond his comprehension. More pressing was the question of what to do once he got the creature back to the ranch. He had basic first aid supplies, things meant for treating cattle or his own minor injuries, but nothing that seemed adequate for treating an alien. Did it even have a biology he could understand? Did it need water? Could it eat human food? The dark blood leaking from its wounds suggested it at least had some kind of circulatory system, but beyond that, he was operating in complete darkness. The ranch house finally came into view as the last light faded from the sky. It was a modest structure, a two-bedroom house his grandfather had built in the 1940s, surrounded by a handful of outbuildings, including a barn, a tool shed, and a small stable. He'd installed solar panels 5 years ago, giving him some independence from the grid, which now seemed like a stroke of prescient luck. The fewer connections to the outside world, the better, at least for now. Jack decided against bringing the creature into the house. If it woke up frightened or aggressive, he didn't want to be trapped inside with it. Instead, he dragged the travois into the barn, which was mostly empty this time of year. He'd sold off most of his cattle 3 months ago, keeping only a dozen head, so there was plenty of room. He created a makeshift bed from hay bales covered with old blankets, then carefully transferred the alien onto it. Under the electric lights of the barn, the creature looked even more extraordinary and alien. Its scales caught the light and reflected it in ways that seemed almost to glow. Jack could now see more details he'd missed in the desert. A pattern of darker scales running down its spine, small ridges above where its ears should be, and a musculature that suggested incredible strength. The hands, even relaxed in unconsciousness, looked like they could crush bone. He spent the next several hours doing what he could to treat the injuries. He cleaned the wounds with water and antiseptic, wincing at the way the creature's skin reacted to the chemicals. The scales around the damaged areas seemed to contract and darken. He worried he was causing more harm than good, but he couldn't just do nothing. The burns were the worst, covering portions of the creature's right side and leg. They looked like they'd been caused by intense heat. The scales melted and fused together in places. Around midnight, as Jack was changing out the water in a bowl he'd been using to clean the wounds, the creature's eyes suddenly opened. Jack froze, his hand still in the bowl, water dripping from his fingers. The eyes were unlike anything he'd ever seen, large and golden, with vertical slits for pupils that expanded in the dim light of the barn. They were intelligent eyes, filled with what Jack could only describe as ancient knowledge, and they fixed on him with an intensity that made his heart hammer in his chest. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Jack was acutely aware of how vulnerable he was, kneeling here next to a being that could probably kill him without much effort. But the creature didn't attack. Instead, it tried to sit up, got about halfway, and then collapsed back onto the blankets with what sounded like a hiss of pain. Its chest was heaving, and Jack could see the effort it was taking just to remain conscious. "Easy," Jack said softly, the way he would to a spooked horse. "You're hurt. You need to rest." He had no idea if the creature could understand him, but tone mattered with animals, and he hoped it mattered here too. The golden eyes watched him as he slowly reached for a canteen of water. "Can you drink this?" He unscrewed the cap and held it out, making a drinking gesture with his other hand. The creature's eyes tracked from Jack's face to the canteen and back again. Then, moving with obvious pain, it raised one long-fingered hand. Jack carefully placed the canteen in its grip, noting how the 4 fingers wrapped around the metal container with surprising dexterity. The creature brought the canteen to its mouth, managed a few swallows, then handed it back to Jack with what might have been a nod of acknowledgement. "I'm Jack," he said, pointing to himself. "Jack Morrison. This is my ranch. You're safe here." The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on him. He was introducing himself to an alien in his barn, like they were neighbors meeting over a fence. But what else was he supposed to do? The creature's mouth opened, and a sound emerged that was nothing like any human speech Jack had ever heard. It was a combination of clicks, hisses, and tones that seemed to vibrate in his chest. The creature stopped, seeming to realize Jack couldn't understand, and then did something extraordinary. It reached out with one long finger and gently touched Jack's forehead. The moment the scaled finger made contact with his skin, Jack's mind exploded with images. He saw a world that wasn't earth-crimson skies over cities that looked like they were grown, rather than built massive structures that twisted toward twin suns. Beings like the one before him moving through environments that defied physics as he understood it. He saw a ship, sleek and organic-looking, traveling through space. Then disaster, something going wrong. Alarms blaring in a language he couldn't understand. The ship spiraling toward a blue-green planet, burning as it entered the atmosphere. The contact broke, and Jack staggered backward, gasping. His head spun with the lingering impressions of the vision. The creature had collapsed back onto the blankets, clearly exhausted from even that small effort. But Jack understood now. This being had shown him what words couldn't convey. It was a traveler, a visitor, and it had crashed here through some terrible accident. Jack steadied himself against a support beam, his worldview thoroughly shattered. He'd always believed in the possibility of life beyond Earth. The universe was too big for humanity to be alone, but believing in possibility and having an alien dying in your barn were two very different things. He looked at the creature, which had closed its eyes again, its breathing shallow and rapid. "Okay," Jack said, more to himself than to his unexpected guest. "Okay, we'll figure this out. I'll help you heal, and then we'll figure out what comes next." He had no plan, no idea what he was doing, but he'd made a commitment when he'd pulled this being from the desert sand, and Jack Morrison always kept his commitments. He spent the rest of the night in the barn, dozing in a chair he'd dragged in from the house, waking every time the creature stirred or made a sound. By the time the sky began to lighten in the east, promising another scorching day, Jack was exhausted but determined. He'd saved this being's life, at least for now. The real challenge would be keeping it alive and hidden in a world that definitely wasn't ready for the truth that we are not alone. Dawn arrived with a gentleness that belied the chaos about to unfold. Jack had finally dozed off around 5 in the morning, his body surrendering to exhaustion despite his mind's insistence on staying alert. He woke 2 hours later to a sound that didn't belong, a deep, thrumming vibration that seemed to resonate in his bones rather than his ears. Cisco was whinnying frantically from his stall, and even the chickens in their coop were making panicked noises. Jack stumbled to his feet, his back protesting from the awkward position he'd slept in. The alien was still unconscious on its bed of hay and blankets, but something had changed. The scales across its body were pulsing with a faint bioluminescent glow, creating patterns that reminded Jack of breathing. The wounded areas still looked terrible, but the bleeding had stopped, and some of the burns seemed less severe than they had the night before. The thrumming sound grew louder, and Jack walked to the barn door, pulling it open a crack to peer outside. What he saw made his blood run cold. Surrounding his property, positioned at roughly equal intervals forming a wide circle around the ranch house and outbuildings, were 7 figures. They were similar to the creature in his barn, but different in subtle ways. They stood perfectly still, each one easily 7 feet tall, wearing what looked like form-fitting suits that seemed to shimmer and shift color to match their surroundings. The morning sun glinted off their scaled skin, and even from this distance, Jack could see the technological devices they carried, objects that looked like weapons, though their design was unlike any gun or rifle he'd ever seen. They weren't moving, weren't approaching, just standing there in a perfect perimeter around his property. Each one faced outward, as if guarding against external threats rather than threatening what was inside. The thrumming sound, Jack realized, was coming from them, some kind of communication or scanning technology, perhaps. Jack's first instinct was panic. They'd come for their fallen companion, and he was trapped here with no way to fight off beings with technology centuries or millennia beyond anything humans possessed. But as he watched, something odd struck him. They weren't trying to enter his property. They weren't demanding anything. They were simply standing there, waiting, watching. He looked back at the unconscious alien in his barn. The vision it had shared with him the night before came flooding back. The crash, the desperate situation. These newcomers must have tracked the ship, followed the distress signal, or some other trace. They'd found their lost companion, but they weren't storming in to retrieve it. Why? The answer came to him slowly, pieced together from the alien's gesture the night before, the way it had shown him rather than told him its story. This species communicated differently than humans, perhaps valued things differently. The fact that Jack had helped, had chosen to save rather than harm or abandon, might have earned him something trust, perhaps, or at least the benefit of the doubt. But he couldn't just stand here guessing at alien motivations. The creature in his barn needed medical attention beyond what Jack could provide, and these beings outside probably had the technology to save it. The question was how to bridge the communication gap and the obvious standoff. Jack took a deep breath, made a decision that was either very brave or very stupid, and stepped out of the barn into the morning light. 7 pairs of golden eyes immediately fixed on him. The thrumming sound changed pitch, becoming almost questioning. Jack raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peaceful intent, and slowly walked toward the nearest figure, which stood about 50 yards away near his eastern fence line. As he approached, he could see more details. This being was slightly larger than the one in his barn, with darker scales and more pronounced ridges along its skull and shoulders. Its suit was definitely technological, with panels that seemed to display information in a language of symbols and shapes that hurt Jack's eyes to look at directly. The weapon it carried was held loosely in one 4-fingered hand, pointed at the ground, not at Jack. Jack stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to communicate but far enough to hopefully not seem threatening. "I'm the one who found your friend, crew member. I found them in the desert yesterday, injured. I brought them back here, tried to help. They're in my barn. They're alive but hurt badly." The being tilted its head in a gesture that reminded Jack eerily of a bird examining something curious. Then it did the same thing the injured alien had done, reached out one long finger. This time, Jack was ready for it. He stepped forward and allowed the being to touch his forehead. The mental connection was stronger this time, more controlled. Jack felt the being searching through his memories of the past 24 hours. Watching through his eyes as he'd found the crashed alien, made the decision to help, struggled to bring it back to the ranch, and spent the night trying to treat injuries he didn't understand. The being was also sharing images with him. He saw the ship that had crashed, saw these 7 beings aboard a larger vessel in orbit around. Earth saw their arrival and their decision to establish a perimeter to wait and observe rather than intervene. When the connection broke, Jack staggered but managed to stay upright. The being in front of him made a series of clicks and a deep rumbling purr that Jack's brain somehow interpreted as approval or gratitude. It turned and made a gesture to the other 6 beings around the perimeter. They remained in position, but the thrumming sound changed again, becoming something almost harmonious. The being in front of Jack then did something unexpected. It reached into a pouch on its suit and withdrew a small device, roughly the size of a smartphone but thicker and made of a material that seemed to shift between solid and liquid states. It manipulated the device with rapid movements of its fingers and then held it out to Jack. Jack took it carefully, noting how it seemed to warm to his touch, almost like it was reading him or adjusting to him. A holographic display sprang to life above the device, showing images and symbols. The being manipulated the air above the device, and the symbols gradually shifted, morphed, and then transformed into English words. "You saved Jivar." The words appeared in glowing text above the device. "The one you call friend in your mind. Jivar lives because you chose mercy over fear. This is rare among pre-contact species." Jack stared at the words, his mind reeling. Pre-contact species? You mean humanity? More symbols shifted to English. "Your world is young, not ready for the truth of the galactic community. We have protocols, rules about when contact can occur. The crash was accident, violation of protocol. We came to retrieve our crew member and remove evidence. But you complicated this. I complicated it by saving a life? Jack couldn't keep the edge from his voice. You complicated it by acting with honor before obligation. Jaivar's life debt now extends to you. We cannot simply take Jaivar and erase this incident. That must be acknowledged. Jack struggled to process this. I don't want anything. I just wanted to help someone something that was dying. Your friend can go home. I won't tell anyone about this. The being's golden eyes studied him, and Jack got the distinct impression it was amused. The debt is not about want. It is about recognition of value. You risk much for no gain. This is seen. This is honored. We will remain here, guarding, until Jaivar can be moved. You will be under our protection. This is the way. Before Jack could respond, the device in his hands grew warm and more text appeared. Jaivar wakes. Your presence is requested. The being turned away, returning to its position on the perimeter, clearly indicating the conversation was over. Jack looked around at the 7 alien guardians now stationed around his property, then back at his barn where an 8th alien lay recovering. His quiet, simple life was officially over. He'd saved a life and earned a debt from beings who could cross the stars. As he walked back to the barn, the morning sun climbing higher in a sky that suddenly seemed vast and full of possibilities beyond his imagination, Jack Morrison wondered what exactly he'd gotten himself into. Inside the barn, everything had changed. The alien Jaivar, Jack now knew its name, had managed to prop itself into a sitting position against the hay bales. Its golden eyes were fully open and alert, tracking Jack's movement as he entered. The bioluminescent glow from its scales had intensified, creating patterns that seemed to flow across its body like water. Jack noticed the wounds looked significantly better than they had just hours ago. The burns were still visible, but appeared to be healing at an impossible rate, new scales forming at the edges of the damaged tissue. Jaivar made a clicking sound and gestured toward the device in Jack's hand. Jack held it up, and text immediately appeared in the holographic display. You have spoken with the retrieval team. You understand now what you have done. I understand that I helped someone who needed it. Jack replied, not sure if Jaivar could hear him or if the device was translating somehow. And that apparently your people take debts pretty seriously. More text appeared. Among my people, the Shtel-Re, life debt is sacred. You saved me when you could have left me to die. Worse, you could have reported my presence to your authorities, which would have resulted in my capture and study. You chose a third path: mercy and secrecy. This binds us. Jack pulled up an old crate and sat down, suddenly tired again. I'm just a rancher. I don't know anything about galactic politics or protocols or debts. I saw someone dying, and I helped. That's all. That is everything, the text replied. Most beings in the universe act from self-interest or programming. True compassion, helping another at risk to yourself with no expectation of reward, this is rare. It marks you as evolved beyond your species' current state. Great, Jack muttered. I'm an evolutionary outlier. That and $5 will get me a coffee in town. He rubbed his face tiredly. Look, Jaivar, I'm glad you're alive. I'm glad your people came to help you. But what happens now? Those 7 out there said they're staying until you can be moved. How long is that? What am I supposed to tell people if anyone comes by? Jaivar moved slightly, wincing with obvious pain despite the rapid healing. My injuries are severe. The crash burned through my ship's shielding. I have radiation damage to my secondary respiratory system and skeletal fractures in 3 limbs. Your primitive medical supplies help prevent infection, but could not address the deeper damage. The retrieval team has medical technology aboard their orbital vessel. They will transport healing equipment tonight after your sun sets. In 4 of your days, I will be well enough to leave. 4 days, Jack repeated. 4 days with 7 aliens standing guard around my property. That's going to be real subtle? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. My nearest neighbor is 12 miles away, but someone's going to notice something. We get the occasional hiker. Border Patrol flies over sometimes, and I've got supplies being delivered next Tuesday. The guards will not be seen unless they choose to be seen. Their suits adapt to environment visual camouflage based on light reflection manipulation. Your delivery will arrive as scheduled. The driver will see nothing unusual. This is managed. Jack wanted to feel relieved, but a new concern was forming. You keep talking about protocols and rules. What happens when you leave? Do your people wipe my memory? Make me forget this happened? There was a long pause before new text appeared. No. Memory modification is considered violation of sentient rights among all civilized species. You will remember everything, but you must never speak of it. If you provide proof of our existence, it will trigger contingency protocols. Your world is not ready. Premature contact has destroyed civilizations before, so I just go back to my normal life, pretending I didn't spend 4 days hosting aliens at my ranch. Pretending I don't know we're not alone out there? The weight of this secret suddenly felt crushing. Is knowing the truth not better than comfortable ignorance? The text seemed almost gentle. You ask the universe a question all beings eventually ask. Are we alone? Now, you have your answer. Most of your species will die without ever knowing. You are privileged. Jack Morrison. Jack wasn't sure if he felt privileged or cursed, but he understood the point. He stood up and walked over to where Jivar sat. Up close, he could see the intricate patterns in the scales, the way they overlapped and moved with each breath. This was a living, thinking being from another world, and it was sitting in his barn, talking to him through an impossible translation device. Despite everything, a sense of wonder began to pierce through his anxiety. Tell me about your world, Jack said impulsively. If I've got to keep this secret for the rest of my life, at least let me know what I'm keeping secret. What's your home like? Jivar's eyes seemed to brighten, and Jack got the impression the alien was pleased by the question. My world is called Shtala. It orbits binary stars, 2 suns that dance with each other across our sky. Our atmosphere is richer in nitrogen than yours. Our gravity slightly less. We evolved from ocean-dwelling predators who developed intelligence to coordinate complex hunts. When we emerged onto land, we brought our collective thinking with us. Collective thinking? Jack asked. We can share thoughts through touch, as you have experienced. It makes us highly efficient, but also means we value honesty above all things. Deception is difficult when minds can touch. Your species evolved differently. You are isolated in your individual minds, which makes you simultaneously more violent and more creative than most species we have encountered. Over the next several hours, as the day heated up outside and the alien guards maintained their silent vigil, Jack and Jivar continued their conversation through the translation device. Jack learned about the Shtari civilization, which had achieved space travel when humans were still living in caves. He learned about the Galactic Council, a loose confederation of hundreds of species that maintained order and protocols to protect young civilizations from premature contact. He learned that Earth had been observed for millennia, that the Shtari and others had been watching humanity's development with great interest and some concern. You are a paradox, Jivar explained. Your species creates beautiful art and music, shows capacity for great love and sacrifice. But you also wage war over resources you have in abundance, over beliefs that divide rather than unite. You poison your own world while possessing the intelligence to save it. The Council debates constantly whether humanity will mature before you destroy yourselves. That's a cheerful thought, Jack said dryly. What's your vote? I did not have a vote until now. I am a survey pilot, not a counselor. But having met you, having experienced your choice to help despite fear and risk, I am more hopeful than before. If one human can act with honor, Perhaps your species has more time than some believe." The conversation was interrupted by a change in the thrumming sound from outside. Jaivar's eyes widened slightly, and text appeared rapidly on the device. "Alert! One of your kind approaches on motorized vehicle. 3.7 miles from your location and closing." Jack jumped up and moved to the barn door, peering through a crack. Sure enough, he could see a dust plume in the distance. His stomach sank as he recognized the vehicle when it got closer, a Jeep Cherokee, dark green. That was Deputy Tom Vasquez's personal vehicle. Tom sometimes stopped by to check on Jack, part concerned friend and part suspicious lawman who'd never quite believed. Jack's explanation for the sudden move out to the middle of nowhere. "This is bad," Jack muttered. "That's a deputy sheriff. Local law enforcement. He stops by sometimes, unannounced. If he wants to come in, check things out, Dotty." He turned back to Jaivar. "Can your people stop him? Turn him around?" They could, but it would require methods that would raise suspicion. Better to handle this naturally. "Can you convince him to leave without searching your buildings?" Jack thought fast. Tom was a good guy, but thorough, and he had a cop's instinct for when something was off. Jack would have to give the performance of his life. "I'll try. But you need to be absolutely silent. And those patterns on your scales, can you turn off that glowing?" "Yes, I will minimize all bioluminescence." "But Jack Morrison, if your friend discovers me, the retrieval team will intervene. It will not be pleasant for him. Then I'd better make sure he doesn't find you." Jack grabbed a baseball cap from a hook on the wall, pulled it low over his eyes, and stepped out into the blinding midday sun to face whatever came next. Tom Vasquez pulled up to the ranch house in a cloud of dust, his Cherokee's engine ticking as it cooled in the brutal afternoon heat. He was a stocky man in his mid-30s, with dark hair starting to show gray at the temples and the weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. He climbed out of the vehicle, adjusting his sunglasses as he looked around the property with the casual but thorough scan Jack had seen 100 times before. "Jack," Tom called out, raising a hand in greeting. "Hell of a day to be outside. You got a minute?" Jack forced himself to walk casually toward his old friend, trying to keep his body language relaxed, even though his heart was pounding. "Tom, hey, yeah, it's a hot one. What brings you out here? Everything okay in town?" "Town's fine. Actually, I'm here because something weird happened last night, and I wanted to check if you saw or heard anything." Tom pulled a small notebook from his shirt pocket, flipping it open. "We got multiple reports from folks out on Highway 66 that's about 15 miles north of your place saying they saw something in the sky around 8 p.m. Described it as a bright light moving erratically, then disappearing toward this direction." Jack's mouth went dry. The crash. Multiple witnesses. This was exactly the kind of attention Jaivar had said needed to be avoided. A light in the sky? Could have been a meteor, maybe. Or one of those military drones from the proving grounds. Maybe, Tom said, but his tone suggested he wasn't convinced. But we also found some weird burn patterns on the desert floor about 7 miles northeast of here. Real strange stuff, Jack. Ground was fused like glass in some spots. And there was this track leading away from the burn site, like something had been dragged or crawled away. Jack could feel sweat running down his back that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You think it was a plane crash? Someone need help?" "That's what we thought initially, but there's no wreckage, no distress calls, nothing on radar. And the burn patterns don't match anything our people at Davis Mountain have seen before." Tom looked directly at Jack, and Jack could see the cops' suspicious nature warring with their friendship. "I'm checking with everyone in the area, seeing if anyone noticed anything unusual. You see or hear anything strange yesterday or last night?" "Nothing," Jack lied, hating how easily the untruth came. "I was out checking fences most of the day. Got back here around sundown, fed the animals, and turned in early. Slept like a rock." Tom nodded slowly, still watching Jack's face. Mind if I look around a bit? Just being thorough. We want to make sure nobody's hurt out there somewhere. This was the moment Jack had been dreading. Look around. Tom, it's like 110 degrees out here. Come on, man. You really want to go tramping through the desert on the off chance you'll find something. Besides, if something had crashed on my property, don't you think I'd have noticed? Probably, Tom admitted, but he didn't move toward his vehicle. Instead, his eyes drifted toward the barn. That your horse making all that noise? Cisco usually that agitated? Jack had been so focused on the conversation he hadn't noticed. But Tom was right. Cisco was whinnying and kicking in his stall, clearly still upset by the presence of the alien guardians positioned around the property. Yeah, he's been weird since yesterday. Think maybe there's a mountain lion around. Found some tracks this morning that look suspicious. Got him all spooked. Tom's interest sharpened immediately. Mountain lion? That close to the buildings? Jack, you know you need to report that. We've had problems with lions getting too comfortable around properties. One attacked a kid's dog over in Tucson last month, but the truth would destroy him. His mind is not prepared. His culture is not prepared. Sometimes mercy requires deception. You understand this, even as it pains you. This is wisdom. Jack changed the subject, not wanting to dwell on the moral complexities. How much longer until you're well enough to travel? The sooner you're gone, the sooner things can go back to normal around here. The medical equipment arrives tonight. The guards will transport it from the orbital vessel once darkness provides cover. With proper treatment, my healing will accelerate significantly. 3 days, perhaps less. 3 more days of living a lie, of looking over his shoulder, of wondering if the next visitor would be one interaction too many. But it was also 3 more days of something extraordinary, of conversing with an alien intelligence, of learning secrets about the universe that humanity wouldn't discover for generations, if ever. Jack looked at Jaivar, really looked at the being. The scales, the golden eyes, the alien features that should have been frightening but somehow weren't. You said I'm privileged to know the truth. Sitting here, talking to you, I'm starting to understand what you meant. Even with all the stress and danger, this is amazing. How many humans can say they've met someone from another world? Very few. And most who were shown only what we wanted them to see: brief encounters, controlled contacts. You are among a handful who have engaged with us as equals, as thinking beings deserving of respect and honesty. This too creates a debt. Jack Morrison, you have given me dignity in my moment of weakness. This is not forgotten. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Jack and Jaivar continued their conversation. The aliens shared stories of other worlds, of species so different from both humans and Stalri that they existed in states Jack could barely comprehend. Beings made of crystalline structures that communicated through light refraction. Hive minds spread across entire planets. Entities that lived in the crushing depths of gas giants, swimming through liquid metallic hydrogen. Each story expanded Jack's understanding of what was possible, what existed out there among the stars. And with each story, the weight of the secret he'd have to carry grew heavier. How could he go back to worrying about cattle prices and fence repairs when he now knew the universe was teeming with wonders and terrors beyond imagination? As twilight approached, the thrumming sound from outside changed pitch again. Jaivar's eyes fixed on the barn door. The medical equipment is being transported down now. The guards will bring it here within the hour. My real healing can begin. And you, Jack Morrison, should prepare yourself. What you see tonight will be like nothing in your experience. Jack nodded, his curiosity overcoming his exhaustion. After everything he'd already witnessed, he figured he was ready for whatever came next. He was wrong, of course, but he wouldn't realize that until much later. Darkness fell across the desert like a curtain, and with it came wonders. Jack watched from the barn doorway as 3 of the alien guardians moved with liquid grace across his property, carrying devices that seemed to defy physics. Some floated alongside them, suspended in midair by forces Jack couldn't see. Others were compact enough to be held in one hand, but pulsed with an inner light that suggested incredible power. The guards set up what Jack could only think of as a medical station in the barn, working with silent efficiency. They erected a framework of light, literally, beams of solid-looking illumination that formed a dome around Jivar. The injured alien was moved into the center of this dome, and then the real work began. One device projected what looked like 3-dimensional images of Jivar's internal structure, rotating slowly in the air. Jack could see what he assumed were organs, skeletal structures, circulatory systems, all alien, all fascinating. The areas damaged in the crash were highlighted in red, and there were more than Jack had realized. Jivar hadn't been exaggerating about the severity of the injuries. Another device, a panel covered in symbols that shifted and changed, was placed near Jivar's head. The alien's eyes closed, and Jack saw its entire body relax in a way that suggested either sedation or deep meditation. Then the healing devices activated. Jack had no other word for it. Healing. He watched as focused beams of light, invisible to the naked eye but visible through the holographic display, penetrated Jivar's body and began knitting together damaged tissue. Bones that were fractured realigned themselves with microscopic precision. Burns that had looked catastrophic began to fade, new scales growing at an accelerated rate that should have been impossible. "It's like watching time-lapse photography," Jack whispered to the guard standing nearest him, the one he'd first spoken to that morning. But in real time, the guard's translation device activated. "Your medicine treats symptoms or removes damaged tissue. Our medicine accelerates the body's natural healing, provides building blocks at the cellular level, and guides regeneration. The body heals itself. We merely facilitate and direct. How long does this take?" "For injuries of this severity, approximately 8 of your hours. Jivar will sleep through most of it. By dawn, the physical damage will be repaired. The psychological impact of the crash will take longer, but that is not something we can accelerate." Jack settled in to watch, mesmerized. He thought about all the people he'd known who suffered injuries or illnesses that could have been healed by this technology. His father, who died of cancer when Jack was 19. His ex-wife's brother, paralyzed in a car accident. Tom's daughter, who'd been born with a heart defect that required multiple surgeries. All that suffering, all that pain. And the solution existed but was being kept from humanity because they weren't ready. "It's not fair," Jack said quietly. The guards seemed to understand without clarification. "No, it is not. But fairness must be balanced against survival. If we shared this technology now, your world's power structures would collapse. Wars would be fought over access to medical devices. The wealthy would hoard. The poor would die anyway. Your species must first solve the problem of equitable distribution before advanced. Technology can be safely introduced, so people have to die until we figure out how to share. Yes, it is cruel, but the alternative, premature access, leading to societal collapse and even more death, is crueler. The Council has observed hundreds of civilizations. We have seen this pattern repeat. Young species must mature at their own pace." Jack couldn't argue, even though everything in him wanted to. He understood the logic, hated the necessity, and felt the weight of this knowledge settling into his bones. He would return to his normal life, knowing that cures for every disease existed, that pain could be eliminated, that broken bodies could be made whole, and he could never tell anyone. Hours passed. Jack dozed occasionally, waking to check on the progress. Each time, Jivar looked healthier. The burns faded to nothing. The scales grew back, gleaming and perfect. Through the holographic display, Jack watched internal organs regenerate, Bones strengthened, systems that had been failing restore themselves to full function. Around 3 in the morning, Jivar's eyes opened. The alien sat up slowly, carefully, testing its body. When it stood for the first time, reaching its full 7-foot height, Jack felt a mix of relief and sadness. This miracle meant Jivar would survive, would go home. It also meant Jack's brief window into the larger universe was closing. "How do you feel?" Jack asked, though he could see the answer in the alien's fluid movements. The translation device text appeared. "Whole, pain-free, grateful beyond my ability to express in your language or mine. You saved my life, Jack Morrison. The medical technology saved my body. But without your initial intervention, I would not have survived long enough for rescue. The debt stands. I still don't want anything," Jack said. "Just, when you're out there, among the stars, remember that humanity isn't all bad. That some of us try to do the right thing, even when it's hard. I will remember. And I will report to the council. One voice among many, but voices accumulate. Perhaps your species evaluation timeline will be moved forward. Perhaps not. But the record will show that Jack Morrison of Earth acted with honor when no reward was offered and punishment was risked." The guards began packing up the medical equipment with the same efficient speed they'd shown setting it up. Within an hour, all evidence of the alien technology was gone, loaded onto devices that hovered and followed the guards as they returned to their positions around the property. Only Jivar remained in the barn, and one guard who seemed to be monitoring the alien's condition. "When do you leave?" Jack asked. "Tomorrow night. The orbital vessel will descend to a safe retrieval point approximately 3 miles from your location. The guards and I will make the journey on foot. Once we are aboard, the ship will depart your planet. Within days, we will be beyond your solar system. Within months, I will be home. And this ranch goes back to being the boring, isolated place it was before you crashed here. Will it? Or will you see it differently now? Will you look at your night sky and know that ships pass through it? Will you see your fellow humans and wonder if they could also act with honor, given the chance? Your world may return to normal, Jack Morrison, but you are forever changed." Jack knew it was true. He'd never look at the stars the same way again. Never hear about UFO sightings without wondering. Never see reports of strange lights or unexplained phenomena without thinking about protocols and young civilizations and alien observers who watched from the shadows. They spent the rest of the night talking, Jack asking questions he'd never have another chance to ask, Jivar answering what the protocols allowed. They discussed philosophy and evolution, art and science, fear and hope. As dawn approached for the second time since they'd met, Jack felt like he'd known this alien for years instead of days. When the sun finally broke over the eastern horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and pink, Jivar moved to the barn door and stood looking out at the landscape. "Your world is beautiful. Harsh, but beautiful. I understand why you humans love it so fiercely, even as you damage it. There is a wildness here, a frontier spirit that reminds me of my own people's early history. Will you ever come back?" Jack asked. "I cannot say perhaps. If humanity reaches the threshold for contact within my lifetime, I will volunteer to be part of the first delegation. I would like to return to this place, to see how it has changed, to see how you have changed. But that is many years distant, if it happens at all." The day passed quietly. Jack went through the motions of his normal routine, feeding animals, checking equipment, making sure everything looked ordinary. Tom called once to apologize for rushing off and to say that he'd be back out to check on the mountain lion situation soon. Jack assured him there'd been no further signs and he'd keep watch. Another lie, another wait. As evening approached, Jivar began preparing for departure. The guards had apparently been in communication with the orbital vessel, coordinating the extraction. Jack stood in the barn, watching the alien make final checks of its healing, and tried to think of something profound to say. Everything he came up with sounded hollow or inadequate. Jivar solved the problem by stepping forward and placing one long-fingered hand on Jack's shoulder. Words are insufficient, so I will simply say this. You have been seen, Jack Morrison. Truly seen. Not by your species, who cannot know what you have done, but by mine. That is something. That is enough. Will I ever hear from you again? Or is this goodbye forever? The alien paused, then reached into the pouch on its suit and withdrew a small object, roughly the size of a coin, but perfectly smooth and black. Keep this. It is inert, untraceable, and by your standards, indestructible. But if your planet ever reaches the threshold, if contact is made, present this to any Eshatal you encounter. It contains the encoded record of our meeting, my testimony, and my debt. It will identify you as honored. As friend. Jack took the object, feeling its surprising weight and warmth. Thank you for everything. For trusting me. For sharing what you did. For making me see the universe as bigger than I imagined. Thank you for showing me that honor exists even in young species. That compassion can transcend difference. That your people have hope. They stood there for a moment longer. Two beings from different worlds who'd found common ground in the most unlikely of circumstances. Then Jivar turned and walked out of the barn, joining the 7 guards who'd maintained their vigil. Together, the 8 aliens moved across Jack's property with fluid grace, heading northwest toward the retrieval point. Jack watched them go, their forms gradually disappearing into the gathering darkness and distance. He stood there long after they were out of sight, holding the black coin in his palm, feeling its weight as both a physical object and a symbol. When he finally could no longer hear even the faint thrumming of their communication, he looked up at the sky, where stars were beginning to appear in the deepening blue. Somewhere up there, a ship waited. Soon, Jivar would be aboard, beginning the journey home. And Jack Morrison, simple rancher from Arizona, would be left with memories no one would believe and knowledge he could never share. He thought about the responsibility of it, carrying the truth alone, living with the weight of secrets that could change everything but must remain hidden. But as he walked back to his house, the desert night settling around him with its familiar sounds and smells, Jack realized something important. He'd been given a gift, even if it came wrapped in obligation and silence. He knew now that humanity wasn't alone, that out there among the infinite stars, civilizations rose and fell, beings loved and dreamed and struggled just as humans did, that the universe was vast and full of wonders. And somewhere in that vast universe, one being remembered the name Jack Morrison and called him friend. Inside his house, Jack placed the black coin on his nightstand, where he could see it every morning when he woke. A reminder, a promise, a connection to something greater than himself. Tomorrow, Tom would probably stop by again, and life would continue with its familiar rhythms. Cattle would need feeding, fences would need mending, and the desert sun would rise and set with indifferent regularity. But Jack Morrison would never again see his life as small or insignificant. He'd saved a life that came from the stars. He'd been seen and honored by a civilization that crossed the cosmos. And he would carry that truth inside him, a light in the darkness, until the day humanity was finally ready to join the greater galactic community. If that day came, he'd be waiting. And he'd have quite a story to tell.